Dear sisters and brothers, peace be with you. I've chosen to talk about the situation in Pakistan and what it means for the rest of us. The talk is entitled Uprising in Pakistan, Its Significance for the World. There's an uprising in Pakistan which has elicited a very strong response from millions of people right across the country, from every province. It is a mass movement in the real sense of the word. Why is there this protest? Why are they protesting? Pakistanis of all walks of life, Pakistanis of different ethnic origins. The main reason for their protest is they see the present government as a government which was manufactured in the United States of America and in Britain, as a foreign inspired, foreign directed government, working, of course, with locals, with local Pakistani leaders. They see it as a government which is not legitimate, a government that has been imposed upon the people to pursue the interests of foreign powers. And this is why they're angry and they're protesting. Some commentators have said that the protests in some of the cities in Pakistan may well be the biggest gatherings that have ever taken place of human beings on earth, which I think is really quite remarkable. It's true. The observations of these individuals. I would like to talk about the significance of this protest movement for all of us, the rest of the human family, those of us who may have no ties to Pakistan, who have nothing to do with the history and politics of South Asia. Why is it important for us, for all of us in the planet? I shall look at it from different perspectives, but there are perhaps 5 perspectives which are important, and they are interrelated. Number 1, this mass protest movement in Pakistan is an open rejection of regime change, the politics of regime change. And the politics of regime change has been a very important dimension of international politics since the end of the Second World War. This is what the US has done all along. It is a vital aspect of its attempt to perpetuate its dominance. For the US to remain a hegemonic power, regime change is very important. They've done it over and over again in so many different parts of the world. Some people have estimated that regime change operations have taken place on perhaps 80 to 90 occasions all over the world, regime change operations. And Pakistan is just the latest, though there has been a history of regime change in Pakistan itself. Leaders who had been elected, some not elected, but overthrown nonetheless by the US and its allies. In other words, we have to recognize the significance of this because we know how important regime change has been in global politics. In order to serve the interests of certain global players, regime change has been critical. There's another reason why we're looking at regime change. Because regime change has, over the decades, resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of millions of people. Regime change in Iraq alone, more than 1 million died. We know of regime change in Libya, thousands died. In Syria, it failed. Regime change in Syria, it failed miserably, but nonetheless, there were sacrifices. Human beings were killed, thousands of them. So regime change is an indictment, a damning indictment on international politics and what has been happening. And by recognizing the significance of this protest against regime change, we are honoring the dead. We're honoring the hundreds of thousands, the millions who have died. We're remembering them. We are saying, look, you have not sacrificed your lives in vain. Your sacrifice is massive, but it has made us conscious of a terrible injustice. Getting rid of leadership, a government which is elected by the people or which has the support of the people, simply because you want to pursue your own selfish interests in global politics. So that's the second reason. The third reason why this is so important for all of us, it is a way of asserting, of people asserting their right to choose their own government, their right to pursue their own policies, to set their own agendas, to shape their own destinies. You don't have to do the bidding of someone else. You have a right to do this because it's your land, your people, your future. And if you look at what has happened in Pakistan, this is very clear. The Pakistanis are telling the whole world, we want to determine our own destiny. We don't like this idea of you telling us how we should live, how we should govern, what should be our national goals. It's not for you to determine these objectives. It's our mission, it is our challenge, and we will do it our way. That I think is also very, very important. Not just for Pakistan, for people everywhere, all over the world, including small countries and, of course, big countries. This is the message that the millions who have come out on the streets in Pakistan are conveying to the rest of humankind, that they are the masters of their own destiny. They don't want to play second fiddle to someone else. They don't want to take orders from other people. They don't want to be slaves, as some leaders have put it recently. They don't want to be slaves. They want to be their own masters. And that is related to yet another very important reason. What is at stake here is the right of a nation to formulate and to implement its own foreign policy. Linked to the earlier point, but this is very specific. You determine your own foreign policy. You decide who your friends will be, how you work with your friends, who you will not work with, it is your right. So the right to determine one's own foreign policy, to be independent. In other words, to give meaning to the idea of a sovereign nation state. When you say it's a sovereign nation state, what does it mean? That you have a right to control your own foreign policy. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why the United States was very unhappy with the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, because he made this very clear that he wanted an independent foreign policy for Pakistan, not dependent upon other people or the desires, the whims and fancies of others. So this assertion of one's independence and the right to formulate an independent foreign policy to protect the sovereignty of your nation in the real sense, that I think is a very important factor too. And the fifth and final factor, why this is important to all of us, to the whole world. It is not just foreign policy. It is the right to formulate, to implement domestic policies which serve the interests of your own people. It is right to have foreign policy, that's one aspect of it, but this right to have your own domestic policies where you decide what is good for your people. You decide, for instance, that your priority would be getting rid of poverty. Your priority would be raising the incomes of the vulnerable segment of society. That would be a priority. And you decide that, and you pursue that. Your priority would be getting rid of corruption and nepotism. Your priority would be having other policies, health programs vis-a-vis education, culture, that are determined by you. You are in charge of those policies. And that, I think, is also a very, very important aspect of being independent. All these countries are independent countries, the countries that we're talking about, but they have been subjected to this sort of politics for such a long while. The politics controlled by the hegemon and the allies of the hegemon. Now we are saying, look, there's no real liberation for us unless we are truly liberated in the sense that we shape our own domestic policies and our foreign policy. So these would be some of the reasons, friends, why what is happening in Pakistan is so important for all of us. And what do we do in a situation like this? Of course, the people in Pakistan will continue to protest, and there will be protests elsewhere. But that itself is not going to change the situation. I think those of us who are outside, we can also do a few modest things, like writing letters to all our MPs, to our government leaders, and saying, make your feelings known. Tell the leaders in Pakistan that you want Pakistan to have an independent foreign policy, independent domestic policies. You don't want Pakistan to be the slave of anyone. As a global citizen, you feel for Pakistan and you want to convey this message to your Pakistani sisters and brothers. I think that's what we can do. And we can hold meetings, we can spread the word, we can spread the writings, emails, WhatsApp documents, and so on. We can do all those things. There's a lot we can do, especially at a time like this, and especially in this particular phase of human history. There's a lot that we can do. And I think we should do this with all the courage and determination that we have. Because this is a turning point in history. Rejection of control and dominance by other forces, a plea, a heartfelt plea for genuine independence, an attempt by people who have suffered, who are no longer around, but also those who continue to suffer, to say, we are not slaves, we want to shape our own future. That, I think, is what is important about what is happening in Pakistan.